I'm glad to see that you made the trek all the way out to the cow campus. That's exciting. I did see the livestock on the way here. I also want to thank the police officers who are protecting this event. Apparently there are 100 police officers that were necessary to protect you guys and to protect me so that I can say basically conservative things. And all of this because of the overkill that is necessary on the university level thanks to the idiocy of so many of the leftist protesters who threaten violence and threaten trouble. I will say that some of the protesters outside, good for them. I mean, it does take some, at least they're putting their money where their mouth is. It's cold outside. So good for them for at least going out there. I guess it's not that cold out here, right, for you guys. So just for me, I'm from California, whatever. Okay, so I'm a wimp. All right, so I am glad that they're not in proximity to actually shut down the rail lines, which was supposedly the reason why we were all forced to come all the way out here. The statement from the university president on why we are all out here as opposed to on the main campus is just absurd. His statement suggested, quote, the university hosts a wide variety of events welcoming tens of thousands of people to campus each and every day, and yet magically they somehow couldn't fit 1,000 of us on the main campus. They had to shuttle us all the way over here. He says, we strive to meet the unique needs for each and every event, and the event scheduled for later this month is no different. When working to accommodate a venue request, our top priority is and will always be the safety and security of our university community. And with that in mind, the university works with organizers to determine a location that meets everyone's needs to the best of our ability. Well, it didn't really meet the needs of the several hundred people who are on the wait list who wish they could come, but they could not because the venue is simply too small. They said this has nothing to do with ideological discrimination, which comes as a surprise considering the number of mainstream leftist speakers who have come to this campus, few of whom have actually been sent all the way out here. Now, I also appreciate that the University of Minnesota greenlit an event protesting white supremacy in the age of Trump on the main campus, an anti-racist teach-in, which is super exciting. I guess this is done in opposition to this event. It's really exciting since I'm not a white supremacist, you may notice from the Jewish headgear that I constantly wear. I was actually the top target of anti-Semitism on the internet in 2016 among journalists. And I didn't vote for Trump, so well done, guys. You were spot on, that entire description. White supremacy in the age of Trump. Every single word except for in, the, and of is wrong. Okay, so tonight, before I go any further, I do have one further note on University of Minnesota. Apparently, you guys are supposed to have some sort of BDS vote in the next few days. For those who don't know, Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions, which is a program to get the university to divest from all companies that do business with the State of Israel. That's an anti-Semitic program. That program is designed to strike at the heart of the State of Israel, the Jewish state. The only reason anybody's even considering it is because it is the Jewish state. I am not aware of any movement on the campus here for divestment from Iran, for divestment from Afghanistan, for divestment from Indonesia, for divestment from Saudi Arabia, for divestment from Jordan, from divestment from Egypt. I'm not aware of any of those, all places with egregious human rights records. But Israel is a different story because, of course, it's filled with Jews. So before anyone votes for BDS, they should just understand exactly what it is that they are doing. They are full-scale endorsing anti-Semitism on a grand scale. All right, so now let's get to the main topic. So today's topic is capitalism and the First Amendment. And unfortunately, capitalism has gotten a really bad rap, particularly among people of our generation. I'm barely still of your generation. Right? So I'm going to hold on to that signifier as long as I possibly can. Too many young Americans don't know anything about capitalism. They don't know why it's good. They think socialism is good. There's a Harvard Institute of Politics poll in spring 2016, and it found that Bernie Sanders, that loon bag, was the only major candidate with a net positive rating among 18 to 29-year-olds. 54% viewed him favorably, compared with just 31% who viewed him unfavorably. And now they're making the argument we should lower the voting age to 16. I can't see how that goes wrong. The same poll showed that only 42% of young Americans supported capitalism. 33% said they supported socialism, as in full-scale socialism. Like 1 in 3 young Americans supports full-scale socialism. Fully 50% of all Democratic voters said they favored socialism over capitalism. 1 in 2. Okay, that's probably because young people are too young to remember when socialist nations like the USSR actually threatened nuclear destruction, when they murdered tens of millions of people. I mean, there still are some there's still some Soviet-style dictatorships, right? The communist Chinese are still imprisoning millions and billions of people under repressive, harsh rule. North Korea, obviously, is still a communist paradise where people are shipped off to gulags. But the idea of socialism has become very popular among young people. And the reason that it's become popular among young people is because they've been told that it is moral. Not that it works, Not that it's great, but that it's moral. It's fair. And we all like things that are fair. If we're in a room and somebody has more money and somebody has less money, wouldn't it be more fair if we just pooled the money and then we split it up evenly among the participants? You know, just like the cookies in kindergarten. Except, of course, that's not the way the world works, and that's not actually moral. Because in a free country, wealth and the capacity to gain it is largely contingent on the decisions that you make. It doesn't just fall upon you. Most wealth in the United States is not inherited. Most wealth in the United States is created over the course of lifetimes by people who engage in economic activity and commerce. Capitalism is good because capitalism is freedom. Socialism is bad because socialism is tyranny. Not it's an aspect of tyranny. Socialism itself is tyranny. The statement of socialism is that your labor is owed to the society. The notion of socialism is that you do not own your own freedom. You do not own your own time. You do not own your own labor. You do not own your own work. You do not own the products of your own work. The basic notion of capitalism is you own all of those things, and now you have to engage in free exchange with someone else who does not owe you anything. If you want to thrive, if you want to succeed, you are going to have to make something somebody else wants. People think capitalism is selfishness. No, socialism is selfishness. The notion that I have to somehow supply you the money so you can sit in your basement and paint with watercolors. Socialism, the idea that I'm supposed to fulfill all your dreams by paying you for something I don't want and have no need for. But capitalism is precisely the opposite. We all do stuff in our daily jobs that we don't like. Why? Because there's a group for it who want to consume it. How many people love their daily job every day? I'm lucky. I get to go to a job that I really enjoy every day. But a lot of people don't. And you know why they do it? They do it because they understand that in a free society, they're going to have to produce something that is not entertaining and interesting only to them. If my podcast had one listener, I would have to quit podcasting. And if whatever business you go into has no customers, your business will go out of business. As I'm fond of saying, capitalism is forced altruism. It forces you to do something that somebody else wants if you want to live. Socialism is forced altruism in a different way. It's forcing your altruism to me. Right? So capitalism is about I have to be forced to do something good for you in order for me to live. And socialism is about the idea that I have to be forced to do something for you so that you can live. That's not the same thing at all. Capitalism also happens to be the most efficient system for the distribution of wealth in the history of mankind. It is the greatest it is the greatest engine for growth in the history of mankind. It is the single greatest force for the empowerment of individual human beings in the history of mankind. So, why is it unpopular after all this is said? It's unpopular because it's very easy to demagogue capitalism. Any policy that has diffuse costs and concentrated benefits is a popular policy by nature. Right? Any policy that has diffuse costs and concentrated benefits is going to be popular. So subsidies, for example, to farmers in Iowa, those are popular because farmers in Iowa get a big chunk of cash, and you only lost 1 cent off your paycheck, so you didn't even see it, you didn't even notice it. Well, socialism is sort of the same idea. If you don't notice the money coming off your paycheck, then you're not going to notice that that one person is getting a bunch of money. So that person benefits, and that person feels good about the benefits they just received, but you don't even notice the money coming off. Except that in a socialist system, you have to take so much money off the top that everybody notices, of course. Now, socialism in and of itself, as I say, is tyrannical. It is evil. Socialism violates at least 3 of the 10 commandments. It puts government before God. It says that theft is fine. Theft is no longer a problem so long as you and your friends vote for it. And, of course, petty jealousy is something that is necessary. It's good to be jealous. Workers of the world must unite, not because they're necessarily being grinded down by the boot heel of capitalism, but simply because they are jealous of the achievements of others. So much of America's discussion right now about income inequality is not about the suffering poor. So much of it is about the so-called thriving rich, the 1% at the top. It's about tearing down the people who succeed, not about empowering the people who are failing. If we were really talking about helping the poor, we'd be talking about helping the poor, not income inequality. Income inequality itself does nothing. That discussion does nothing to help the poor. What we have to talk about is ways that we can help people who are poor rise out of current circumstance through better decision-making and better opportunity. How about socialism in Europe? You know, so people who are defenders of socialism and say, okay, well, you know, you guys always mention Cuba, you always mention North Korea, you always mention the USSR, you always mention China. But, well, they say China is growing. China's growing because they loosened up their economy, and now it's basically state capitalism. But then they say, well, what about the socialistic countries of Europe? So this is Bernie Sanders' play. And what about Denmark? What about Switzerland? What about Sweden? Those are not socialist countries. Those are capitalist countries with a high tax system. Okay, that's not the same thing. A socialist country is government owns the means of production. It is about heavy regulation of all parts of the economy. Denmark is actually a better climate to do business than the United States is, according to the Heritage Foundation. Significantly better. There's a lot of foreign investment in Denmark. What makes Denmark a so-called socialist country is the fact that it has 60% tax rates. That's also the reason their economy stagnated so much that they just had to radically cut their tax rates. The same thing is true in Sweden. Sweden gained riches only after embracing capitalism in the mid-19th century. From 1975 to 1993, when they put in place all of these social programs with high levels of spending and high levels of taxation, the country dropped from 4th in the world wealth ranking to 14th. Swedish scholar Nima Sandanji called the country's embrace of redistributionism a colossal failure, which is why they had to liberalize their markets again. Okay, again, back to income inequality for a second. What about this idea that socialism cures the evils of income inequality? First of all, every country on earth has some level of income inequality. In fact, some of the places with the least income inequality are also some of the poorest places on earth. There are places where everybody is destitute. If you go over to certain countries in Africa or Asia, everyone is poor and there's no income inequality. Does that mean that these are great places to live? No, it means these are horrible places to live because nobody has any wealth. America has high levels of income inequality, but our poor are richer than everybody else's poor, which is the thing that matters. In the United States, even the poor people are rich by global standards. According to Pew Research, quote, almost 9 in 10 Americans had a standard of living that was above the global middle income standard. And by the way, the notion that the middle class has been just taking it on the chin in the past few decades in the United States, this is not true. The upper middle class has been picking up all the people who used to be in the middle class. It's not that the middle class devolved into poverty, it's that the middle class split, and most of the middle class became upper middle class. The upper middle class was just 12% of Americans in 1979. As of 2014, 30% of Americans were now upper middle class. And it's also worth noting that all of our schemes to end income inequality have been an enormous fail. We've spent $22 trillion in the war on poverty to no avail. We spend $30,000 per year on poor non-elderly families. And that's paid for by the rich. For all the talk about income inequality and the rich not paying their fair share, the rich are paying pretty much everything. Statistically speaking, people who are high earners in this country are paying virtually all net cost that the federal government incurs. According to the CBO report on distribution of taxes in 2013, the top 1% of households paid 34% of their income to federal taxes. The middle 20% paid just 13%. According to the American Enterprise Institute, the highest income quintile is financing 96% of the entire system of transfer payments to the bottom 60% and funding the functioning of the federal government as well. We actually have the most progressive tax system among all OECD 24 countries. For all the talk about how all the rich people are getting rich in the United States and the poor people are getting poor, we have the most progressive tax system in all of the OECD. And income mobility has not declined either. This is another myth that's pushed out there, that if you're poor, you can never become rich in the United States. This is not true at all. When people talk about the people in the 1% getting richer, they forget. You will be in the 1% one day, and you may not be in the 1% one day. I've been not in the 1%. I've been in the 1%. I assume at some point in the future, I won't be in the 1% by income earning anymore. If people move in and out of percentiles of income, it's not the same person. It's not that you were born into the 1% and then you stayed in the 1% your entire life just getting more wealthy. In fact, statistically speaking, if you were in the 1%, there's a pretty good shot that you're going to regress to the mean. For those who were in the top 1% in 1996, and we're not talking about the 1% bracket, we're talking about the actual people in the 1% in 1996, by 2005, their income had decreased on average by 26%. And income mobility works the other way, too. According to Thomas Sowell, a University of Michigan study showed most of the working people who were in the bottom 20% of income earners in 1975 were also in the top 40% at some point by 1991. Only 5% of those in the bottom quintile in 1975 were still there in 1991. 29% of them were now in the top quintile. That makes a lot of sense. Right now, there are a lot of people in this room who are in the bottom or middle income quintile because you're in college. You're not making money. In 10 years, you will be making money, presumably. And when that happens, you will have moved up in the world. As you age, you gain more wealth. This is why your grandmother owns a house, but you presumably do not yet. Okay, this will happen to all of you. So don't pay attention to the false statistics that are being put out there about how in America it's impossible to get ahead. That's just not true. Also worth noting, all the talk about the United States sucking up all the wealth of the world, it is because of a capitalist global system that has become more and more prominent, free markets that have become more and more prominent, that literally half the world has been lifted out of abject poverty since 1980. That's because of the force and power of the U.S. free market economy that has been driving all of that growth. The countries, by the way, that are poor in the world, those countries are not the ones that are being hurt by free trade. They're the ones that aren't even participating in free trade. 2/3 of the global poor on planet Earth live in just 5 countries: India, China, Nigeria, Bangladesh, and Congo. According to the Heritage Foundation Index of Economic Freedom, every single one of those countries ranks 120th or below in terms of free markets. This is not a coincidence. Freer markets means more wealth. Freer markets mean more growth. Okay, now on to the second issue that we're going to talk about, and that, of course, is free speech. And this one obviously has become a more pressing concern than even the capitalism conversation, simply because of all of the hubbub surrounding events like this one. We've been told that we have to hold events like this one and places far away from main campuses because we might make someone feel uncomfortable. And if those people feel uncomfortable, then they get to exercise the heckler's veto. And we have to move the entire event away from fora that host 1,500 people and into smaller venues that host 500 people. And we have to put 300 people on the wait list, because obviously we wouldn't want to offend anyone. Those people outside, they're the people in the right, the people protesting. Again, it's fine for them to protest, but the people who are either protesting or who are threatening and necessitated the taxpayer dollars going toward the use of 100 police officers tonight, those people are the problem. You are not the problem. I am not the problem. The people who are creating the threats that require the spending of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to hold events like this one, those people are the problem. And unfortunately, their philosophy is a growing one. The idea that if we say stuff that's offensive, this is a form of violence. And therefore, violence can be used in response, and that's why we need to bring in police officers in order to protect all of this. This is just an aspect of identity politics. How is it that when I say something, this is an aspect of violence? Because I'm attacking someone's identity. Don't you see? It's not just that I'm saying something with which you disagree, it's that I'm attacking your identity. So when I say socialism is stupid and capitalism is good, there are some people who feel offended by this. When I suggest that in a free country, you should be able to rise as an individual if you just do some simple things, if you make some simple good decisions, then this is seen as offensive by certain people to their identities. If I say that white privilege is not a thing, if I say that just because you were born white in the United States does not mean that you are bound to succeed, and that if you were born black in the United States that you are bound to fail, this is seen as an attack on identity. Now, what makes any of this an attack on identity? The victim mentality that purports to suggest that every failure you have is due to the color of your skin, or the area in which you were born, or the religion that you practice. All of this is nonsense. But when I say that, it makes people feel bad. It makes people feel bad because it's a lot easier to blame everybody else for your problems than it is to take responsibility for your own problems. Now, this is not to say there's no such thing as discrimination. Of course there is. It's not to say there aren't people who are suffering from racism or bigotry. Of course there are people who are suffering from those things. But we are all on their side. There's not a person in this room, I would imagine, who sees a racist incident, a clearly racist incident, and doesn't feel terrible about it and doesn't seek to help. I don't know a lot of people out there in the United States who are looking around going, look at that terrible racist incident, I'm so happy that happened. And if they are, they're not coming to my speeches. Right? Those aren't the people who are showing up and listening to what I have to say. Those are the people who are going and listening to the alt-right, maybe. Those are some of the people who are listening to members of the radical left. Those aren't people who are showing up to mainstream conservative speeches. But again, if you challenge the notion that we live in a victim-first culture, if you challenge the notion that in a free country you can succeed, then this is bound to make people feel really bad. And so white privilege, microaggressions, trigger warnings, this has become the order of the day on college campuses. And the way this works is that we now judge you not by the content of your character, but by the color of your skin. We are supposed to discern whether your view is good or bad, not by what you have to say, but simply by who you are. So because we have a white privileged country, a country filled with privileged white people, built by white people for white people, because of all of that, if you are a white person, then you have to take a ticket and go to the back of the line when it comes to the views that you get to express, or you have to shut up entirely. Now, never mind that there are minority groups in the United States who are making a lot more money on a per capita basis than white people are in the United States. Right? Jews were a minority group in the United States. They're still a minority group in the United States now for purposes of the census. They've been considered white, but for a long time they were barred from country clubs, for example. Jews on average earn more than the average white person does in the United States if you count them as a separate census group. Same thing is true for Asian Americans. Asian Americans have the single greatest income on a family level of any group in the United States. Is that because of Asian privilege? Is that because of Jewish privilege in the United States? Or is that because there are a lot of people in these particular subgroups who work really hard and have a culture that pushes working really hard? That has nothing to do with race. That has everything to do with the decisions that are made by parents to raise their children in a particular way with a particular viewpoint on hard work. But again, white privilege has to be the order of the day so that people don't feel bad about themselves. Well, I'm here to suggest that if you're failing in the freest country in the world, and you can't point to actual evidence of discrimination against you, you should feel bad about yourself. Because you've done something wrong. You've failed. You've made bad decisions. Maybe you're not working hard enough. Now, I'm not saying that people who, of course, are born with problems, people who have mental illness, people who have physical disability, people who are obviously born behind the 8 ball in terms of what they can achieve, that's something that's different. But I'm talking about the normal, average, everyday American of any race, any color, any creed. If you're failing in the United States right now, there's a really good shot it's because you did something stupid. The reality is, according to the Brookings Institute, which is a left-leaning institute, I've cited this fact many, many times, virtually everyone in the United States who has done these 3 things will never be permanently poor. Get a job, finish high school, don't have babies before you're married. That's it. You do those 3 things in the United States, you will not be permanently poor. As I've always said, you are capable of doing all of these 3 things. You're all here, you're all in college, that means you finished high school. You're all capable of getting a job, I assume, even poli-sci majors. I know, I was one. And you're all capable of not having a baby until you're married. As I always say, just don't put that thing there without that other thing on it. It's not that difficult. Somehow people for dozens of years have been avoiding pregnancies that they didn't want. So all of this is to say that if we are going to start shutting down free speech, if we're going to start throwing out particular viewpoints because of the identity of people, this is a form of tyranny. And free speech matters because if we don't have free speech, then minority viewpoints, viewpoints that were once minority, can never become majority. One of the great ironies of this whole situation is that it's minority interest groups that have been taking the lead on shutting down free speech. But if free speech had been shut down in 1960, you would not have gay rights, you would not have civil rights, you would not have women's rights. All of these issues were at one point minority issues. Now they are majority issues. What turns a minority issue into a majority issue is our capacity to debate it and reason through it and have conversations about it. But now there are a bunch of folks who want to shut that door, who want to say, listen, we've got the perfect society, we've got our utopia, we're dominant politically, and now everybody else has to shut up. That's not the way that this works. The way this works is we all get to have a conversation together. And if you have a problem with that, then you're un-American, because this was the basis of a free and open society. The notion that we could discuss with each other, that we weren't going to question each other's motives first and foremost, that we were going to reason with one another. The whole basis of a republic is the idea that we are rooted in reason. I'm writing a book right now on everything moving from ancient philosophy to modern philosophy. It's a real page-turner. And the entire premise of Western civilization is that freedom is predicated on the idea that we can discuss with one another without relying on identity as the trump card. Once identity becomes the trump card, how the hell are we going to have a conversation? Because all you do is just shout, you can't understand me, I'm black, and all I do is shout, you can't understand me, I'm Jewish. Okay, well then the conversation is over, and I guess we ought to just go get our mallets and hit each other. Because that's the only way that any of this is going to get resolved. That's not the way things are supposed to work. Unfortunately, we're seeing it play out that way in virtually every political debate, the gun debate just being the most obvious lately. Folks suggesting, both people who are witnesses to the shooting down in Parkland and members of the media suggesting that if you disagree with them, then it's because you're an uncaring, bad human being. You can't hold political conversation with folks who are calling you evil. Just a basic rule of political discussion. So here's my recommendation. If you believe in freedom, if you believe in individual rights, if you believe that you own your labor, if you believe you own your time, if you believe in the capacity of the other person across the table from you to have a conversation, then everybody needs to embrace a free market, and everybody needs to embrace a free market of ideas. Thanks so much. Happy to take your question.